an indictment of those outlets. It's also an indictment of the AFT and its president, Randy Weingarten, who seems to be very, very happy about Trump's nominee for labor secretary because she's completely opposed to common sense education policies, and her glee ought to be a giant red flag for the incoming administration. As for the nominee herself, her name is Chavez-DeRemer. She's currently serving as the U.S. representative for Oregon's 5th Congressional District, and many of Trump's strongest supporters are sounding the alarm bells about her nomination. Even though she's a Republican, many people are saying she's more of an anti-conservative rhino who will prioritize the interests of union bosses over the needs of union workers. For this reason, among many others, many Trump supporters are trying to steer him in a better direction, and that includes our next guest, who recently wrote a letter to Trump urging him to reject Chavez-DeRemer. Joining us now to discuss is Mark Mix, the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Riley, good to be with you. That was a whirlwind. My goodness, you got it all in there at once. First, I want to start out with the hotel workers. I mean, this is one of the designs of Unite Here that basically said they want to harmonize every single hotel contract, not only in California and the West Coast, but across the entire country, so they all expire at the same time. And that way they have the ultimate leverage over hotelers and folks that run these hotels, particularly at a time like this when families are getting together and visitors are coming in. And so their leverage is maximized in a situation like this. So no surprise here. They hit when it hurts the hardest, and this harmonization of all these contract expirations leads to events like this. As far as the unions getting the favorable press by buying it from these news outlets, or news outlets, as we say, that's no surprise. When you can collect money from workers as a condition of their continued employment, you can do whatever you want with that money, and you don't get to hold these union officials accountable. So thank you for breaking this story and bringing up what the Washington Examiner did. On the labor secretary, you're right. She is the labor secretary, one of 3 Republicans that endorses the repeal of all right-to-work laws across the country. She wants to break them all up and eliminate them all. She doesn't have legislative power as the secretary, but she has the ear of the president, and she has regulatory and policy positions that I think are going to be detrimental to the American worker.
Wow, okay, a lot to unpack there. But just to be clear here then, that would mean that she is in favor of something like forced unionization. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Apparently, the co-sponsorship of this bill, this so-called PRO Act, H.R. 20, which is the first bill the Democrats put in the hopper in this congressional session that's now ending, would say that you have to pay dues or fees to a labor union in order to keep your job by repealing the 26 right-to-work laws that are in effect right now across the United States.
Wow. Okay. By the way, my thinking on this, if labor unions really are so good and so beneficial across the board, then why do you have to force people to join them? It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But I'd also like to ask you about an alternative, because a lot of people are trying to steer Trump in a different direction, in a better direction. Who else do you think he could nominate possibly?
Well, there's a couple people that popped up on the radar screen to begin with. Andy Pudzer, who was the CEO of Carl's Jr., was someone in contention during the first Trump administration. Democrats didn't like that, so they took him down. He withdrew. Then a guy by the name of Pat Pizzella, who was the acting Secretary of Labor after Alex Acosta stepped down back during the first Trump administration. Pat has a very great understanding of the Department of Labor, how the machine works. He worked there in 2 administrations, and while the swamp is a bad description of what happens in Washington, D.C., Pat's been one of those people that has reformed and tried to create efficiencies at the Department of Labor. So we recommended a couple names, and this came out of left field, no pun intended, as a standpoint of what Trump did nominating this gal from Oregon, who just got defeated in a reelection campaign. But now she's going to be probably going to sail in for the nomination, because we suspect every Democrat senator will vote for her confirmation to be the Secretary of Labor.
And if that happens, you only need a handful of Republicans to break away and go for her, and then before you know it, the damage is done. So I'd also like to ask you then, because that brings us to your letter. So what can you tell us about this letter that you're sending to President Trump?
Well, we just laid out her background when she was in the Congress. I mean, basically 1 term in Congress. She was one of 3 Republicans that co-sponsored the bill to repeal all right-to-work laws. She was one of 8 Republicans who co-sponsored a bill that allows the federal government to impose unionization and union bargaining on the states, Riley. This is the federal government saying, if you don't meet the core conditions that we articulate that you should have when it comes to unionization and granting union officials the power to bargain for government employees at all levels of state government and local government, then we will impose it on you from Washington. That's exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump talked about on the campaign trail when he said we want to get the federal government out of the business of mandating policies to the states and let the states be experiments in laboratories in policy so that they can basically improve or hurt themselves by passing policies that hurt workers and hurt taxpayers, et cetera. So a real surprise there. And then she came out for the unionization of all transportation security workers at the airport, and she's against school choice. So these are things that were on the campaign trail, to your point, Riley, at the opening, attracted rank and file union members to the Trump campaign and to vote for Donald Trump because they were opposite of what the union officials were pushing. They were what Donald Trump was pushing that resonated with most Americans, including union members and including the, quote, working class. And that's why Donald Trump got elected to be the next president of the United States.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it really goes to show that there is a giant gap between union bosses, union elites, the fat cats that are actually getting rich off of these union dues, and then the people who are actually working on the front line. So I think that difference is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. It's very interesting to see that kind of shift. I don't know if that necessarily means we have a permanent political realignment going on, but clearly a lot of rank and file workers are upset with union bosses, and for good reason. So I guess we'll have to see what happens with this pick, but I want to say thank you for putting out that letter. Thank you for calling attention to this. Thank you for raising all of these concerns because these are really, really important. And I do hope that he, either goes with someone else or she withdraws because I don't think this is really a good pick whatsoever. So, Mark, as always, thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Riley. Appreciate the opportunity. Good to be with you.